Good morning, everyone. It's a really great pleasure and honor being here. And it's my first time at OMR, wonderful conference and festival. And it's also great to be back in Germany. I think we were all zoomed out during COVID and I'll be able to see each other in person. I published a new book last October titled Mega Threats, 10 Dangerous Trends that Imperil Our Future and How to Survive Them. It's been already published and translated in a dozen languages. In French, they called it Mega Menace. In Spanish, it's titled Mega Menazas. Was also translated in German, and the title in German is Mega Threats. I don't know why, but they decided to use the English term rather than a German one. We live in a world where there is what I call unexpected, unusual, unprecedented uncertainty. 4 U's. There's uncertainty, there is risk, there is threats, there is chaos, there's instability. And in addition to the traditional and new economic, monetary, and financial risk and threats, there are other ones that are social, political, geopolitical, environmental, health, and technological. And what I tried in the book is to take a holistic approach and not to think only about economic, monetary, and financial, but how they interact with other ones. One observation I think is important is that even if we think about economic, monetary, and financial threats, and this is the finance track of the festival, the nature of these economic, monetary, and financial threats today is very different than even 3 years ago. Why do I say so? If you go back 3 years ago, right before COVID started, or when COVID started, everybody was worried about inflation being too low. It was below 2% in Europe, in US, in Japan. We were worried about lowflation, deflation. Today, instead, we have to worry about the opposite threat, the one of inflation being too high. It's well above 2% in US, Europe, and advanced economies. 3 years ago, the biggest concern about the global economy was the concept of a secular stagnation. Larry Summers said there are too many savings, there's not enough demand, there is not enough economic growth, and because of lack of demand, there'll be deflation, secular stagnation. Today, instead, we have to worry about the opposite, about the concept of a secular stagflation, a situation in which growth is too low and inflation is too high. I'm old enough to remember the 70s, when you had two oil shocks that led to inflation and recession, and the concept of stagflation. We're back again to have to worry about inflation and recession. Stagflation rather than stagnation. 3 years ago, everybody was worried that interest rates were too low, and the savers were not earning enough money on their savings. You had zero policy rates, negative policy rates in Europe, quantitative easing, credit easing. You had $18 trillion equivalent of public debt between Europe and Japan that had a yield that was negative up to maturities of 10 years in Europe and Japan. So interest rates were very low, and while debts were high, private and public, the interest on these debts was too low, and therefore there was no problem of debt sustainability. Today is the opposite. Because central banks are raising interest rates to fight inflation, the interest on the debt is going higher. And the stock of private and public debt as a share of GDP globally has gone from 100% in the 70s to 350 in the world last year. In advanced economies, 420. Debt of households, of individuals, of small businesses, of corporations, of banks, of financial institutions, of government, of countries. There are 60 countries, according to the World Bank, IMF, that are at risk of defaulting on their debts. Private debts, public debts. And for public debt, in addition to official debt, there is implicit debt coming from aging of population and pay-as-you-go, social security, pension, and healthcare system for the elderly. So public debt is 100% of GDP, the implicit one is another 100. So we have a debt crisis like potentially we have never seen before. A few years ago, people were worried about the threats coming from things like hyper-globalization, today we have to worry about the opposite: deglobalization, fragmentation of the global economy, decoupling, balkanization of global supply chains. 3 years ago, we had an everything bubble in US and global equities, real estate, bonds, credit, crypto, meme stocks, SPACs. That everything bubble last year became an everything bust. All the prices were falling. US equities 15 to 20%, crypto 80%, meme stock 80, 90%, real estate down 30%. 3 years ago, everybody was arguing that the dollar was the only global reserve currency. There was no alternative to the US dollar. Larry Summers made actually a joke. They said that people want to replace the dollar, but you cannot replace something with nothing. And he said, what's going to be alternative to the dollar? He said, Europe is a museum, China is a prison, Japan is a nursing home, and crypto or Bitcoin for now is a failed experiment. That was 3 years ago. Today everybody's talking about de-dollarization, about the RMB replacing the US dollar, and we'll discuss whether crypto could be an alternative monetary system to traditional fiat currency. I don't believe so, but some people do. So even the nature of the economic, monetary, and financial risk today is very different compared to even 3 years ago. In addition to this economic, monetary, and financial risk, we're facing other ones that are non-financial interacting with the financial one. Number one, geopolitical depression. We have already hot war between Russia and Ukraine. Brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine could become unconventional, could involve NATO. We have a Cold War between US and China getting colder. People worry eventually even the risk of having a military confrontation on the issue of Taiwan. And I was recently in Israel, where apart from the domestic political problem, the biggest threat is Iran, becoming a threshold nuclear state. And Israel will have to decide this year whether to attack Iran, causing a spike in oil prices, or whether we live with deterrence, mutual assured destruction. This geopolitical depression, cold and hot war, is dividing the world, is fragmenting it, is balkanizing global supply chains, is reducing globalization. We've gone from fair trade to secure trade, from just-in-time global supply chains to just-in-case, from economic efficiency to economic security, from offshoring to friendshoring. It's a divided world, it's a fragmented world with stagflationary consequences. Second, global climate change is becoming a disaster. There's a lot of talk about addressing it. Most of it is greenwashing, green wishing, and green talk rather than action. Unfortunately, we're on a trend that's going to lead us to not plus 1.5, not plus 2, plus 2.5, maybe 3%. We had a global pandemic, and there's a connection between pandemics and climate change. As we destroy animal ecosystem, those animals who carry pathogens get closer to livestock animal, to humans, and that's where you have a zoonotic transmission from animal to human. Unfortunately, COVID-19 is not going to be the last global pandemic. There'll be more and more deadly than COVID-19. And it's going to be an economic and financial and human disaster, worse than COVID-19. What else we have? There's the promise of AI, machine learning, robotic, automation, generative AI. The economic pie might grow. Potential growth might be higher, but we don't see it in the data. But there are negative side effects. One, jobs are going to be lost. Not just blue-collar job, not just white-collar job. Generative AI may actually destroy jobs of critical and creative classes as well. Secondly, this technology leads to an increase in income and wealth inequality. Because if you own the capital and the machines, you do well. If you're in the top 10% distribution of skills, education, human capital, like everybody here, initially AI is going to make you more productive. But if you're a blue-collar, white-collar, low value added, medium value added, increasing your jobs and income is going to be threatened by AI. And eventually, even the jobs of those who are creative is going to be threatened by AI. In some extreme scenario, you could have an extinction of our own Homo sapiens species. That's what people worry about. Machines, super intelligent, essentially taking over humanity as well. And the final non-economic threat is that all this economic malaise, all this inequality, all the people left behind, many young people feeling they're going to be worse off than their parents, is leading to a backlash against liberal democracy. Extreme radical populist parties of the extreme right and extreme left are becoming more popular, both in advanced economies and emerging markets. And that economic populism is going to lead eventually to economic and political disaster and authoritarian regimes. Now, this interaction between the economic and non-economic threats is what I call mega threats. But if you think about it, this past December, the Financial Times called this interaction polycrisis. That was one of the buzzwords of the year. The same idea that economic and non-economic factors are threatening, leading to a polycrisis. I was on stage with the head of the IMF in Washington presenting my book, Kristalina Georgieva. She said, we have a confluence of calamities like we have not seen since World War II. The head of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, has spoken about the perma-crisis. And I was in January in Davos for the World Economic Forum. If you read the World Global Risk Report, it was all about mega threats, polycrisis, economic, non-economic ones interacting with each other. Now, I don't care whether you call it mega threats or polycrisis or a confluence of calamities or a perma-crisis or the most dangerous decade and turbulent decade ahead, the way they have put it. We live in a world that is dangerous, in which there is a whole new range of economic, monetary, and financial threats that are feeding on the non-economic and vice versa. And the book is not about being depressed or giving up, but it's a call to arms. Say, let's wake up. When somebody sounds the alarm, let's not push the snooze button and go back to sleepwalking and being zombie. We live in a dangerous world where there are dangers that can overwhelm us, not only destroy our economic future, our wealth, our savings, our jobs, but they can also destroy the planet and destroy our own species. Could become a nuclear winter, could be climate change, could be a worse pandemic, could be economic and political collapse, could be eventually AI taking over the humans. So the time to act is now, to be aware of these threats and take action about it. And that's what the book is all about. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. Have a seat. Thanks very much for this rather dire overview. And let's dive into one of the topics you touched upon. Cryptocurrencies as an alternative financial system, an idea that has gained a lot of traction during the last 15 years. Is this a solution to one of our problems?
Well, certainly after the global financial crisis, there is a concern about the future of fiat currencies. Now we have inflation. There's a risk of debasement of the fiat currencies, and people are thinking about the alternative. I've been personally quite a skeptic and critic of cryptocurrencies because if you know anything about economics, monetary theory and money, you know that money, to be a currency, has to have some features. And none of these cryptocurrencies are currencies. Something has to be a unit of account. Things have to be priced in it. This water, this microphone, food, whatever. Nothing is priced in Bitcoin. It's still priced in dollar, in euro, in yen. So it's not a unit of account. Something has to be a scalable store of value. With Bitcoin and proof of work, you can do 7 transactions per second. With the Visa network, you can do 50,000 transactions per second. So first of all, it's not used as a means of payment to buy goods and services. It's mostly used to trade one currency or asset for the other, and it's not scalable. Third, something has to be a stable store of value over wealth or over the price of goods and services. But the price of Bitcoin can go up 10, 20% in a day or fall 10, 20%. And therefore, something that's a store of value has to have that stability. That stability doesn't exist. Finally, in any monetary system, you need a single numerator, something so that you can tell the relative price of one goods and another. But in a world in which every good and every service has a different token, and therefore, to buy Coca-Cola, I need a Coca token, and Pepsi-Cola, a Pepsi token. I cannot even tell the relative price of a Coca versus a Pepsi. I mean, if you think about it, the Flintstones had a more advanced monetary system than crypto because they had one single numerator, that's stones, and those stones were telling us the relative price of meat relative to bread. While in crypto, with tokenization, you don't even go back to barter. You lead it to an economic chaos where there is not even an ability to have a way of measuring the relative price of different goods. So It's not a unit of account. It's not a scalable means of payment. It's not a stable store of value. It's not a single numerator. So calling them cryptocurrencies is a misnomer. There may be something else. They're not currencies.
Let's touch upon two of those objections. Number one, scalability and the volatility thing. So there are stable coins being proposed as an alternative to Bitcoin because everybody knows the chart is like this. It's very difficult to use it as a means of payment, but stable coins could be an alternative.
Well, you ask people in crypto, what's the great innovation or the killer app or whatever that makes crypto something new? They scratch their head and they say, stable coins. Big deal. Stablecoin is replicating fiat currencies. If you want to replace fiat currency because they're going to be debased by inflation or whatever not, a stablecoin is one stablecoin, $1, €1, is the same thing. So you have not replaced fiat currency, first point. Secondly, many of these stablecoins are not stable. They're not really backed by a system where you have short-term liquid dollar, euro reserves backing them 100%. Some of them were purely algorithmic. They collapsed and billions of dollars were lost. They were scam. They were criminal scam. And we already have fiat currencies. We have system of payments that are becoming faster and cheaper globally for transaction. So why do we need stable coins? Again, stable coins are usually used in the crypto ecosystem because if you want to evade taxation, if you want to evade AML, KYC, if you're using stable coins, you can transact one crypto against the other one, avoiding formal dollars, but it's just a tax avoidance instrument. It's not really used for buying goods and services. So if that's the big innovation, we have just recreated the euro-dollar banking system that's been around for the last 50 years. It's nothing new.
Okay, what about scalability and energy consumption? I know this is another objection of yours. Ethereum switched to proof of stake last year. And as far as I know, it's mainly Bitcoin that uses proof of work.
The problem is that one of the claims in crypto is that there is a decentralization. But Vitalik Buterin, who created Ethereum, says there is an inconsistent trinity. You cannot have at the same time scalability, security, and decentralization. You have to choose 2 out of 3. Now, in traditional financial system, we have systems that are scalable. You can do billions of payments using Alipay, WeChat Pay, Venmo, and billions of people use them every day. You have security. I often lose. Somebody steals my credit card. In 30 seconds, I call my bank, it's blocked. They freeze the fraud, and they make me whole. So it's 100% secure. But it's not decentralized. It's centralized. Big deal. It's centralized. I have security. I have scalability. In crypto, you don't have scalability, at least with proof of work. You don't have security. If somebody finds your private key, your money is gone for good. And there is not even decentralization. You have oligopoly of the miners, and under proof of stake, that oligopoly is a worse problem than under proof of work. So you get some scalability, but you get centralization and risk of more control. So you have centralized miners, you have centralized developers, you have centralized exchanges, and most of the wealth in crypto is also centralized. The Gini coefficient of inequality for Bitcoin is 0.86. It's greater than the one in North Korea. There's only 0.84, where Kim Jong-un and his family and cronies control the wealth of the country. So there is talk about decentralization, but it's a very centralized system. So it's not decentralized, it's not secure, it's not scalable. And the only way you get scalability with proof of stake is by having even more centralization, even more of risk of somebody then controlling it or doing something dangerous. So it's an inconsistency, and it cannot be resolved.
In your talk, you touched upon the Bitcoin price. You said the bubble burst like 3 years ago, and I know that you more than once predicted that the price of Bitcoin will crash eventually to zero. Now we are still close to $30,000, which is way below the peak, but still. How do you explain that? Or how long do we have to wait until it crashes to zero?
Well, you know, Bitcoin itself may or may not crash to zero, But the point is that the only reason why people are buying Bitcoin was people said it's going to go from 30 to 60 to 100 to 200 to a million. And those predictions have been done over and over and over again for the last 5 years. And today, the price of Bitcoin is the same literally as 5 years ago. We reached a peak of 69, now is 28. So from the peak has lost about 70%. Other cryptocurrencies have lost 80, 90%. By the way, 20,000 ICOs, literally 80% of them were a scam to begin with. Another 17% have essentially lost all their value. So 97% of them have disappeared, 19,300. And of the remaining 700, most of them have lost 90% of their value. Even the top 10 from the peak have lost between 70 and 90%. That's what crypto is all about. So whether it goes to 0 or stays and floats between 10 and 30, who cares? The point is, everybody was betting it's going to go higher. If it stays at 10, 20, 30, you can hold it. What do you get? You don't get income, you don't get capital gain, you don't get utility, you don't get transactability or use. So you can keep it. You know, I collect, stamps. I collect little old coins. Some people are going to collect Bitcoin forever, but doesn't mean it's going to be a currency. It doesn't matter whether it goes to 0 or stays at low value. It's not going to go to 100, it's not going to go to 1 million. That one I can bet.
What about the idea of digital gold?
Well, it's not digital gold. People say it's the new digital gold. We are established that crypto are not currencies. Are there assets? Typically, an asset has either income, equities give you dividends, bonds give you a coupon, loans give you interest, real estate gives you rent, or they have services, commodity, provide you services from water, food, electricity, energy, whatever. Real estate, if you own it and you live in it, gives you residential services. Gold doesn't give you income, but it has been used as in jewelry for thousands of years. It's used in industry like other precious metals for a variety of things. It has been a stable store of value, so it has features that give you some fundamental value. So to price an asset, you have to have a discounted flow of either income or other utility. That's how you price assets, or you price commodities, or you price gold. In the case of Bitcoin, doesn't have income, doesn't have use in industry, cannot be used as jewelry. Actually, I've seen some ugly jewels saying Bitcoin, but they're tacky, and really tacky people wear them, so it's not real jewelry. Doesn't have any real liquidity, doesn't have any use, and therefore any capital gain is not based on any fundamental pricing model that says this is discounted value of incomes or of other utility. How you price it could be 0, could be 1,000, could be 10,000. You don't even have a fundamental model to price these things. So they're not currencies, they're not assets. I don't know what they are. To me, they're bubbles that have no fundamental value, they're not backed by anything, and therefore their fundamental value is 0. And given the energy externality, if we impose a carbon tax for that energy externality, the value of Bitcoin will not be 0, will be negative with the right externality carbon tax. So their value is not 0, sorry, it's negative if we tax them appropriately.
Okay. We'll talk about regulation in a second. I just wanted to touch upon the idea that there are so many criminals and scammers in the whole blockchain space. As you said, a lot of the ICOs turned out to be scams. Yeah. Is this something that you think is a systemic issue, or are we just unlucky having so many, people with bad intention, and as you probably have in almost all new industries using this as a means to do their criminal stuff?
No, I think it's a feature. It's not a bug, but it's a feature of the system. When the internet started, of course, there were many people doing stuff, and many of them went bust. But, suppose you wanted to sell pet food online. There were 20 pet.coms. Out of 20, maybe 2 of them survived. But the idea that you want to sell pet food online because you love cats and dogs is a totally valid business idea. The one that were well done succeeded, the other ones failed, but was not a scam. Many of these things started as a scam. Literally, a study suggested that 80% of all ICOs were a criminal scam to begin with. 17% more had no real business idea, totally flopped. And even after a decade, after a decade of the internet, we had HTML, we had websites, we had apps, we had email, we had tons of stuff. Billions of people are using it for businesses. After a decade or more of crypto, what do we have? A bunch of crypto, call it coins or currencies or assets, is neither of them, exchanging against each other with no value, no utility, no backstop, with so many scams, so many things going really bust. So the amount of criminality, tax avoidance, tax evasion, human trafficking, criminality, financing of terrorism, in the case of crypto, because of the alleged anonymity, is a very extreme compared to any other technological innovation ever.
You mentioned the idea of a carbon tax targeting Bitcoin. In terms of regulation, what do you think should be done? And is the US, is Europe doing enough?
Well, of course, we've learned with all the collapse of the FTXs and other Celsius of the world that there was not regulation, that many of these crypto, their advantage was only regulatory arbitrage. For example, take the idea of doing transaction cross-border. People say, with Bitcoin or Ethereum, I can transfer money from here to Seychelles in 5 seconds. With the SWIFT system, it takes me 2 days. But why does it take you 2 days? Because any bank transferring money from you to some shady account in the Seychelles is to make sure that I'm not a criminal, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not evading taxes, I'm not evading rules, and the other side is the same. And that takes time. SWIFT can do the same transaction in 5 seconds like the Bitcoin. So the bottleneck is not the technology. SWIFT technology is as good and as fast as any crypto, is doing the proper MAL and KYC. If you avoid it, you don't have the compliance costs, you say it's free, it's done in 5 seconds. But if the regulation was the same, and to do the same transaction with Bitcoin, Ethereum, you have to do the same MAL, KYC, it will take you 2 days. So there is no fundamental advantage of these things. The only advantage is regulatory arbitrage and avoiding proper compliance of all regulatory regulation. They live on that one. And now there is a crackdown, and there will be a massive crackdown, because no civilized nation, advanced economy, emerging market, is going to accept a system where everything is anonymous. We can move money around without knowing whether there is any criminality involved. The crackdown is starting. There'll be an agreement at the OECD level. I think all of the alleged advantages of crypto are going to completely disappear. Even those that are existing are going to collapse.
So like a properly regulated crypto space will cease to work?
Well, we're already seeing, yesterday one of the major crypto exchanges closed down because the SEC decided you're trading securities, and those are securities, and if you trade securities, you have to be regulated by the SEC. You cannot play this game of pretending of not being regulated, and as soon as they say we're going to regulate you, instead of getting the regulation, they shut it down, it goes bankrupt. If this was a viable business, you go and you register with the SEC, and then you're a viable business, you're regulated, you pay the compliance costs, and you are essentially competing with regulated exchanges on the same term. The fact that they're collapsing shows that they're not viable, that their only basis for existence is avoiding regulation.
All right, Professor Roubini, thanks a lot. This is very interesting, tough talk, and over to Frauke. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.